along that riparian zone between what is and what is possible. How you
Oh,
doing, Ginger?
I love the riparian zone. I'm good. I am just love. I took a walk to a waterfall this morning with my dog, and I just felt that Beltane energy. I felt it. I just felt spring in its full lushness, all the flowers, and I love how tropical like the roadies are. If you really look at them, they're just lush and gorgeous. I don't know. I had it. I had the moment. Finally, I felt like it just hit me. Like this is it. We're opening to summer, even though it's cold and raining. Still, it's like this lushness. This. I don't know. I love this time of year. It feels really exciting. So I'm doing well. And what are you nurturing on this Beltane Eve, Iris?
I am looking out. I'm up on the I just looked out the window and there is a huge eagle just flew right by the
Mm.
so that was a little distracting. But what am I doing? I too am enjoying the lushness of the light that starts to happen this time of year. I feel like, like in those ancient in Ireland, there's all these megalithic like little stone like little weird stacks and little caves, and they're all lined up to be like at certain times of the year. Our house is tucked up against the hill, and it's kind of is one of those because like the sun just absolutely leaves at Samhain and like in Halloween and kind of shows back up at Imbolc. So like we get not any direct sun on our house at all. It's just not, it's all behind the hill
Wow.
for that time period. And then it comes back and it's like, yay. And like and like Beltane is actually the brightest time of year because the leaves aren't all out yet. And so because there's trees, of course, it's in the forest. So right now it's like the peak of light more than it is at the solstice
Mm.
for my little tiny micro thing. So what I'm nurturing is getting my ass outside every time the sun comes out.
Yes.
And I'm tending a bunch of baby plants, and yeah, that's what's going on with me. Living in my own little forest light feature.
Yeah, no, I used to live on a property like that, and it was very noticeable. Also off grid, so we were on solar, so literally we had power that came back on from the sun at a certain point in the year, and I think it was around Imbolc as well when you got the lift of the south sun, starting to hit our solar panels again. That was really
Oh.
a remarkable difference when you're off grid, you notice that you suddenly have access to. Yeah, I mean, here we go. And it's so wild to me that summer solstice is 6 weeks from this point, which
Right.
is the tipping point again towards darkness. Then the days start to recede. So not to confuse anyone because we have a full summer ahead of us, but it is so interesting that we are actually kind of in the last 6 weeks of the waxing part of the year. Now, the Celts would say like Beltane, there was two seasons for the ancient Celts. Like they had summer and winter. And yeah, they had these different points, but like really Beltane and Samhain, which is Halloween and May Day, those were like the gates. Like it was summer from Beltane to Halloween, and then it was winter from Halloween to May 1st. And it kind of feels like that in Oregon. I mean, it really does. I mean, we have spring, of course, but it's kind of rain. It's like we have this like
Yes.
fall, rainy spring, and then you have this like magical, dry, sunny, like abundant season that kind of lifts off or in May, at some point in May, if we're lucky. Uh, anyway, enough talk about weather.
Sorry.
we kind of decided that we were going to pre-plan the topic of this one around shame. And that's because I am hosting a Beltane retreat and my place on May 4th, which is a Saturday coming up. And it is the topic I chose was shame, which is weird, I know, as a topic because Beltane, it's spring and it's about flowers and beauty and blah, blah, happy, happy. But what kept coming up for me is what doesn't allow us to access those things fully. Like, why can't we fully absorb this waxing energy, you know, of the year and of the and all this beauty of the earth, is because we have these stories of shame around us from the dominant culture. And because we are talking nurture culture, I don't think we can talk about trying to shift culture without talking about how the dominant culture shames us. Because I think it's one of the key ways it keeps us in the culture. Matter of fact, that's what shame is designed to do. It is a culturally created emotion that, for survival, is trying to contain us in a certain way of being, so we don't get kicked out of the culture that we're in, or we don't get left out. You know, we can get employed, we can find mates, we can belong, right? So much of how it's difficult to change the dominant paradigm we find ourselves in, even though we might not like it, is rooted in shame in all these crazy indirect and direct ways. Because also, what's really fascinating to me, I'm really fascinated by this emotion, by the way, and what's really interesting to me is that, you know, it's intertwined with everything we do, and yet it's so hidden from us. It's actually one of the least understood and written about and talked about of the emotions, even though it's one of the most dominant ones. So with that, I'm just going to hand that off to you. And what do you think as I say all that? Because you really were the one who started this nurture culture idea in my brain. You planted this seed. And how do you think about that? Like, do you agree with my assessment that it's shaming of the shaming coming from the dominant culture is a part of why we can't easily shift it?
Oh, I absolutely. I actually total 100%. Because like think about, you know, it's just layered and layered and layered. And it's and it becomes like this really, it's very painful to like, it's, you know, so it's like a hot stove that gets fed. Like I feel like the dominant culture is like, you know, shoveling coal into this hot stove of shame inside of us in like 100,000 ways. And the irony is that it's like a coal furnace in the basement, and you don't get to go in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, you know, you're just in it, and it because it's like kind of, but it's intolerable. Like it's this intolerable feeling that that we've tried desperately um to not feel, because it's sort of like, and I think it goes back to this, the kind of the core idea, I would say, of the dominant paradigm is that we live in a binary.
Mm.
There's good and there's bad. And
Yes.
shame says you are bad.
Shame's the gatekeeper of that binary.
Shame's the gatekeeper of that binary. And there's that story of eternal damnation that is very tethered to that when you're bad, right? So it also pulls the strings of fear and outrage and anger, and yeah, like all that is all bound up in it. And yeah, and it's why we shame not only ourselves, but also why we shame others. So if somebody else isn't doing well,
Mm-hmm.
we need to identify why they deserve it, which is to say we need to shame them for their circumstance.
Yeah.
Because we want to keep, you know, we're holding on by our fingernails into the good side. And
Yeah.
so it's like this weird, and then it's like, if you identify the ways that you're on the bad side, then you need to cover it up, and like, you know, you can't look at it, so you shove it away, and it's like just adds more coal to the fire.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What you're identifying is just like some ways that we deal with shame as a reaction to it. And that's often how we notice shame is well, as in our reaction to it, because shame is actually really, it's like the water that you swim in as a fish. You really don't understand that there is water until you start to like pull it apart. You don't understand there's a problem with the dominant culture until you start to move away from it, and you start to feel that oh, I don't belong anymore. Like I'm like, I mean, we just start picking some examples because it's so hard to talk about it in generalizations. But
Yeah.
one thing that's kind of funny that's coming up for me is not wearing a bra,
Ah, ah,
which
ah.
is something, it's such a simple example, but it's something I decided to do a while ago. I was like, I don't want to wear a bra. I hate bras. I guess I have big boobs. I don't care. I'm just uncomfortable. They never feel good on me, right? I just don't want to wear one. And so I stopped wearing a bra. And like that should be fine. You know what I mean? Like it's my body. Like why couldn't I just choose to not wear a bra? I'm not walking around topless. I have clothes on, but there is something about, just the idea that you don't have this strapped down, like, that it's moving around too much, or whatever. I mean, like, what is that? Like, it is something that I don't really feel bad about until I see or until someone reacts in a way that's like they
Whoa.
make a comment or they have a reaction to it, and then I go through my whole like, oh yeah, like what am I doing, taking photos of myself or recording, oh, I didn't have a bra on, like, oh, that's, and then I have to sit with it. Like, is it shameful? Is it wrong? Do I care? Whose voice is that? Who?
Right.
And that's one of the key things to ask yourself when you feel shame is, by whose standard?
And
Who's
and
shaming me? Who's
and
who's saying that? Go ahead.
no, I'm just like on fire because I because the bra thing, like I of course I only have one breast at this point in my life. And I still feel like I should, if I'm going to be put together, like I need to have a bra on. But the thing is that there are zero bras
Yeah.
that work, right? Like I'm like a double, I have a huge, my one breast is enormous. Like, and when I had two, they were huge too, like the other one was big too. But like, so now I've got a flat side, which I kind of love actually. It's like, that's a whole nother topic, but anyway, the thing with the bra, it's super interesting because it's like really at this point I look like a chicken with a full crop no matter what I do. So like seriously, there's no need for me to wear a bra, but I wear one, and I think it is 100% because I feel like I'm being like I can just hear my mom, like it's like I'm being a slutty or there's something unsavory about
Mhm.
not wearing a bra, and it's like it's absurd. I'm a 50-year-old
Totally.
Amazon.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say it's very Amazonian, but like there it is. It's your mom, it's the culture, right? Like it's such an interesting, it's just one of those interesting examples. That's a very like minor one because I still don't wear bras and I just roll with it. I'm like, okay. Um, depending on the day, like I really don't care, or I'll notice it and then brush it off. Like, it doesn't really impact me that much. But there are other ones that do, and then
Yes.
the shames. So the shame, I guess I want to note that it comes off as self-criticizing. So we attack ourselves first. Like that's that voice of like, oh my God, like I can't, look at the way I look, like, oh, it makes me look whatever. And then the other one would be to shame the other, right? So because it's painful to criticize yourself, you tend to like relieve some of that pressure on yourself by directing it in a different, at the other person, anybody else who's like, well, look at them. Like, what do they think
Which
they're doing? And that is like hot potato, right? Like it gets passed to you and you're like, I don't want this. So like you throw it against somebody else, and it's easier to just start directing the attention away from you. So that's like one of the other things we do. And then the third one, which I'm really good at, is just denial. But like, so, oh, it doesn't bother me, like, whatever. However, then you're kind of creating a life that feels like a defensive posture. Like, I'm just going to get so profoundly good at other things, or I'm going to start getting super busy and productive. And like, I'm going to,
oh.
like, I am going to create a wall of impressiveness with my being that this is not even a thing. And I know you're laughing because it's really common, right? We do. But as I dug into shame, I realized like, oh, perfectionism, over functioning, people pleasing. This is actually a reaction to denying shame and trying to pretend it doesn't bother, it's not there. However, we are reacting to it. We are
Yes.
over, functioning in this way of like, not me, I'm good, and I'll prove to you I'm good by doing all of this all the time.
Oh my God. That's so relatable. And I think that the second one you're talking about, I mean, like seriously, so relatable. And but the second one, when you're talking about the hot potato aspect of it, I think we were talking when we saw each other last about the whole permission. Do you have permission to just be yourself? But I think that second one really plays out a lot when people have strong reactions to young people. If they feel like a young person is enacting something that's in their shame, toolbox, like, wait, why aren't you smiling at the adult? I'm the adult. I'm interacting with you, child. You should hop to, be friendly, be, whatever. And if the child is like shy, or the child is like just not interested in you or whatever, people get really mad, and they get mad at the child and they get mad at the adult, and they're like, oh, but it's like really what I feel like it's like the most perfect mirror.
Yes.
For what
we is a mirror for sure.
It's
If
like
you're,
a total.
yeah, if you're judging someone else, that only exists because you're judging yourself. Like shame always goes in first, and then it shows up as you attacking the other in your head or outwardly, because you're reacting to a shame that was put in you as a child. And now that's the way shame functions. As its function, it's like your job in a way to bring that child in line. So I mean, that's why it's there. Shame is a survival to keep the group, cohesive. So everybody gets fed, everybody gets shelter. People don't just go rogue. There is a healthy function to shame in humanity. Like if we didn't have shame, let's just say, it was an interesting thought when I started thinking about like, what is just a world without shame? Well, I mean, really, you wouldn't give a shit what anybody thought about you or what you said or what you did, which at the outset sounds kind of awesome. However, you would very quickly learn that if you don't have that built into you, you would just, you'd make no friends. I mean, people would be very offended very quickly, move away, you would be lonely. And we're social creatures. We cannot, not have friends, family, relationships, otherwise we'll be sad and lonely and, and not succeed in life. We need our social connections.
So do you think that in a healthy I want to say like organism, but really, but I mean like a community and a healthy family system, healthy like a healthy people system, that shame would be kind of like just like the little like the guardrails to like help you stay simpatico with the people around you, and it could be dissipated instead of stuffed. Do you think that that's
Yes, I think we have so few examples of this, so it's really actually awesome to talk about it, because if we're trying to design a new culture, like a nurture culture, this is a conversation that definitely needs to be had. Like, what would healthy shaming look like? And the two words are hard to even say side by side, because it's always been, we've always experienced it as rather toxic. Like, we're going to make you feel terrible, so you get in line. And however, I do believe that there is, and it really takes like a strong nervous system, a strong and settled nervous system to begin with, which we don't have a lot of running around in this culture. But if you had one, shame, I believe, would be tied in with like the ability to hear someone say like, that hurt my feelings, that didn't work for me, and then be willing to be like, okay, get curious, not react and like, oh my God, go, not go into the shame response of now I'm a bad person, I'm wrong, and then defend, attack, withdrawal, or overfunction. Those are like, I just listed off the what people normally do when they go into a shame response. However, if you didn't go into those 4 responses and you were just like, oh, that's really interesting, tell me more. Like, I want to understand what happened between us. I want to, you know, hear how you're feeling. So it's empathy, it's curiosity, and that's how we learn to like relate better. I mean, really, it could be the guidepost for trying to create communities that were actually way more empathetic and um, supportive. I mean, and with an intention of like, I want to try to do this with you. I want to try to be in right relationship. I want to understand what came up for you and why. But that, again, without going into those four like defensive mechanisms of, oh my God, I'm horrible, you're horrible. I'm gonna
So,
fix it or I'm gonna escape. Those are like the ones we usually use.
so just as you were saying that, I was thinking about like, like there's like the amygdala, there's the fight, flight, fawn, all that stuff. Are those like, in a way, is that like the shame mechanism? So like, is that like that, and so it's like, and if we think of it as not in a good bad continue, dichotomy, but more along the lines of like a rapid response information system,
Yep.
then you say to me that really, I feel really hurt by, X action that you made or that I made. If you were to tell me that, then if I was feeling bad about that, that might be, oh, the realization of like, oh, I had an impact on my friend and I feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of shame, but it's also potentially empathy.
It's the impetus to make it better, right? Like if you didn't care, if nothing came up when I said that, if you didn't have shame, right? You'd be like, okay, well, whatever, move on. Like, and shame it protects connection. Shame is actually in its healthiest form, a protector of community connection and social relationships. That it wants us to care. It wants us to, you know, build those relationships with other people and learn how to do that. That's what it's there for. And it's because it's so powerful, like you said, it's so deeply connected to our amygdala response because connection is one of our
It's
survival instincts. Especially because human babies, right? We need connection for a really long time. Like uniquely on the planet as animals, we are dependent on the adults around us for at least a decade or more. Like we really need other humans. And so that connection is so embedded in our ability to live and survive. We have to have our parents like us enough to take care of us and feed us. So shame is in there to protect that. And so it goes right into our amygdala. Like, oh my God, connection's been severed. Yes, and it's normally associated with freeze. It like, that is they call it a shame, a part of partially like a freeze response. We get like, oh my God, I don't, it just freezes up our ability to like see anything else going on around us. And we usually go internal into a spiral of like, what did I just say? How, I'm a bad person. Oh my God, this person hates me. I mean, it could be a look, right? People roll their eyes. And that's enough to send people into that internal space where everything else that's going on or input that's being offered is gone now. Like shame goes right internally into a deep spiral inside. But I think it's related to fawning, which is where all that functioning and people pleasing. It's like, oh, now I really need you to like me. So what do I have to say? What do I have to do? You're looking for all the social clues on how to please people or never have them mad at you in the first place. You're so uncomfortable with being in a room where anybody could have any conflict with you that you'll do anything to avoid that. So there's another one. Flight, just like, I mean, I've known a lot of people who do this, but like, that's where the drugs and alcohol and everything come in. It's like, you just check out. Like you go into shame comes up and it's like, I don't want to feel this. I don't know how to feel this. So I'm just gonna get high, smoke weed, go have a drink. You know what I mean? It's just like, and also there's this whole like, well, I don't know what you need. Is that we see a lot of dudes doing this. I think I have ex-husband be really good at this. Like just go into a shame response that sounds like I don't know, and just you can see it's shame, but it just shuts the system down. I would tend to go into overfunction, fawning, people pleasing, and he would tend to go into I'm checking out now because of our, respective childhoods. This is like, and
Yeah.
socialization as male and female. This is like how we were acculturated to handle this.
And it's super deep, right? Like I've thought about, I come from a big Irish family, Irish American, because, my great grandparents were Irish. So it's kind of a while, but they were famine immigrants. And I think I can see a connection to that in the ways in my own self for sure, but I also observe it in my siblings around our kind of comfort, discomfort around food stuff. We have some food stuff, and I think it's all tied directly to that to that so it's like I think about it's like it's a lot of it we're getting it from we're being it's the relay race of generations that sets us up for these automated systems on when shame gets activated.
Absolutely, it's survival. This is survival. And when people learn to survive, they create offspring. So like we are,
Right.
Successful in certain ways at like, handing this down because it worked for a generation. Like they made it because they were
Yes.
operating under these systems of shame and survival and connection and however it made it work, right? In hard circumstances. But then you get to places in the culture where it's like, this isn't needed anymore. And yet
Right.
it's the water you're in now. I would
Right.
say there very similarly, if you take the shame of capitalism, which is another big system of shame we live in that we very rarely see or question because we're in it from birth. But this whole idea of being productive, right? Or
Yes.
and so many people rate their days based on how productive they were. And if they didn't get anything done today, or they weren't focused on one thing, that was a wasted day. There's some shame around that. Like, oh, I didn't get anything done today. I just like hung out and, knitted. Or like, oh man, like that's not a celebratory statement. That's like, I should have, right? There's shame.
Yes.
Been doing more. I should have, you know,
You know,
whatever.
you know what else I've noticed? Just I'm obsessed with that particular, like this productivity bot that
Yep.
terrorizes me at times. But I like, okay, so I noticed that there's a hierarchy of tasks for what count towards my quota for having gotten enough done. So, and I'm just trying to observe that recently. So, like yesterday and this morning, I spent hours doing some very needed correspondence in organization that involved doing stuff on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
But that, like, my sense of time when I'm working on the computer is really weird, I think is part of it. But also, like yesterday, it's like I got some stuff knocked off my list that's been on my to-do list for months. I mean, it's great on one hand. The like part of my brain was like, yay, success. The other part of my brain is, yeah, but you didn't do XYZ in the studio.
Right.
Because I didn't do any physical work. I didn't do any physical. I have nothing physical to prove it. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like,
And I want to just comment on that. It's so interesting because the capitalist model, I think we keep having this reference to, like, again, like who's saying that? Like, whose voice is that? When you
right.
why like that's where the curiosity around shame is really interesting. Like, where in the culture is that coming from? And I trace that back to this factory system. Like
Yes.
our capitalist model, whether we realize it or not, is still coming from like this 19th century. The factory whistle blows, you show up for work, you make the widgets, you work really, really hard, and and then you're exhausted and you go home. Then you've earned your day's labor. And you go back and you keep doing that, year after year, and maybe you'll work your way up the chain to be a manager or whatever. I mean, but this is like, we have this in our head. It's so outdated. It was only ever applied, it really only ever applied to a very small segment of the population to
Yes.
begin with, right? And I think it's key to note that a lot of this shaming is based off this kind of white male capitalistic Western model. And if
In
we
our
don't, and it's like just imbued into our movies, our culture, our stories. And if
our
we don't,
schools,
our
our schools
schools,
were based on that.
absolutely, our education system, our religions are too. So like if you don't fall into that, there is this like inherent sense that I didn't do it right, or like, yeah, my day was wasted. Because even, it's so interesting. I mean, we live in a technological age, and you're doing
Right.
things on your computer, and yet you didn't feel like you were productive enough because you weren't physically like
Yes.
manufacturing or doing something that could be counted as a widget. And there you go. Like, that's how deep this stuff is embedded. It doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't make sense because
There's a feeling, because there's like this comparison going on, right? In the, like, honestly, I could say when I was farming, I
that felt
amazing.
great.
I felt so unashamed. Like, I
Yes.
finally was working hard enough and producing enough actual things that fit the kind of like old school idea of, you this many bunches of carrots. Like, I could count my day. Like, I did this, right? It was really amazing for my
Yeah.
like, I finally have become productive enough. Of course, it was totally exhausting, but like, there was some pleasure in just finally getting into a groove with what the culture's been saying I should have been doing all along. It was interesting to note that.
I mean, I mean, seriously, same with being a production baker.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing finer than this,
Right.
cornucopia of loaves of bread,
Because that's the old thing. That's like what we're
yeah.
supposed to be doing. It's so interesting.
I mean, it's like I can totally remember my production numbers from farmers market days of like, okay, 72 the cinnamon rolls, okay, like I could probably list my production schedule, and that's been years. But
Yeah.
it's totally true, right? Because it's like I think it might even be, I think that satisfaction is tied into farther back than just the industrial revolution. I guess capitalism is super old though. We've been exploiting each other for.
Yeah, I want to add to like creating. I think we're also touching into another primary satisfaction, which doesn't have to do with shaming, but it has to do with things that our ancestors have done. Like, when we talk about farming and baking, we're really actually leaning into like this other area, which would be another podcast of what Francis Weller calls the primary satisfactions. And he's like, he says this really well. And actually, when I heard him talk about it, I was like, oh, that's another reason why farming felt so good, because it is a memory of how humans have been on the planet, what we've done for generations and generations and generations. And when we lock into that, it satisfies some deep like soul memory of like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. That, I mean, I spent hours a day trying to figure out how to make this little widget on Instagram auto reply to comment. I mean, like, yeah, I'm telling you, not as satisfying as growing tomatoes.
and that's
I think it's not, that doesn't have anything to do with shame. That has to do with some kind of deep relation
right
nature and what it means to be like human. However, the shame part that's interesting is that you, as you rated your day in your head, was like, I didn't get enough. I mean, there was like this sense of not being enough. That's the shame.
Right. Yeah. Like, and I just feel like this is the great segue for puppets, the concept of puppets, which is to say the puppet came up because I did have a little bit of observation, which is always the big win, right? When you like are observing it while it's happening.
Yes.
And so it's like when I can observe it when it's happening and it feels separate, then it's like, that's one of my automated little puppets. That's like a little, that's a little strategy to try to help me get my needs met. That's a little outdated.
Yeah.
The shame, and there's like a bunch of shame puppets. I wonder if they're all shame puppets.
I know.
Are all the puppets shame?
What I want to just note about shame, which and why I've been so kind of geeked out on it lately, is that it has this really unique ability to bind to all our other emotions. Unlike anger, which is, anger is anger, but when shame and anger bind, they create different things, right? So it doesn't allow you to actually just feel righteously angry anymore. Now all of a sudden there's shame around being angry. Like either you can't be angry or it's somebody else's fault, or you know what I mean? There's a story in there that's like partially shaming either you or someone else. And it turns it into something that doesn't create a healthy expression of a boundary or an actual, expression of this is the line that's been crossed, or this is the injustice I need to fix, which I think is why anger shows up in us. Like, hey, whoa, that's
Yeah.
now all of a sudden, like, oh, well, you're just in, blah, 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 because it's your fault. That's the shame being pushed away from me because I don't want it to be my fault. But that idea of it's somebody's fault and that, someone's got to be blamed, there is shame and anger together. It turns into judgment, like hyper criticism, one way or the other. And I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, it can lead into wars. I mean, the reason we have like massive conflicts, generation after generational conflicts is because of all this shaming going on and these stories about who has the right to be angry or doesn't, or who has the right to grieve and doesn't. It goes right
Right.
to grief. I mean, grief is when it's imbued with shame. It's really interesting to me because I think it turns into, well, depression for one, because you don't have the, like, I'm grieving or I'm angry and I'm sad combo, and I don't want to talk about it to anybody because I'm bringing people to, no one will understand.
Right.
It's just me. The main lie of shame is like, it's just you. Nobody else feels this way. You're the loser. You're the one that doesn't fit in. This is your problem. Everybody else has got their shit together. This is, and
But it,
we've all felt that way. When you look out in the world, if you're having that thought, their shame is absolutely talking to you and whispering in your ear. That's the voice of shame, which isolates us. And so we never check it out. We feel, or anxiety, we don't want to, like, am I the only one who's anxious in this? Turns out you're never the only one. And if you start to talk about it, you'll find out quickly everyone's very, very similar in that regard. We're all really dealing with the same sets of emotions. Maybe they flavor a little differently depending on our upbringing. But shame, anger binds, shame, fear binds, shame, and grief binds. They all kind of, I mean, we all have them.
and so when those become entwined and like it like kind of knot together, I think that's where there's absolutely physical health repercussions. It's like that's where like it's totally the connection to somatics and like our bodies, because it's like, like there did this, I'm sure you've heard about, like there's a Gabor Mate talks about women that can get pissed off live longer than women that suppress their anger.
Yeah.
So it's like when you feel shame about having an emotion, which is just like a little signal from your body to your, a nonverbal signal. You have that natural signal and you feel shame about it, it's gonna get you.
Yeah. Yeah. The most, I mean, when I coach people in my practice, the thing that's almost always in the way of them offering themselves compassion, or of them actually being able to just express the emotion, like cry or be angry, or just, talk about fear, is because they have a story about shame. Oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or they shouldn't be this way. It's one or the other, right? Or, this comes up too, like, I just don't know. And that's one of those fascinating things where shame has bounded up so much that it's just, you just drop out completely. It's like a numbing. It's like,
I don't know why I don't feel it. They don't know
what I'm feeling. Yeah. It's just so numb. I can't access it because things are bound together. It's very confusing. It makes accessing what's really going on very confusing, because there is this internal, like, deep dive that you're in. You're spiraling in the story of, I feel this way, but I don't think I should. And I don't think they should be this way either. And, just like you go into this little whirlpool and everything becomes like kind of on lockdown, which is a protective mechanism. Again, shame is always trying to protect you. So lockdown might be what happened in your family? People just didn't talk about it. People got quiet.
So this, if I've talked, I don't know if I've talked about this in another podcast, but some years ago, I went to this midwifery conference, and there was a guy, this doctor was there, and he was talking about how we take care of families and babies, because like all the emotions, they're a chemical, right? They're a neuropeptide. So any emotion the mother feels, it is transferred to the baby. So if you have, and this is really important because we have war, and this is, it's doing a lot when it's not, so what happens is the mother is feeling fear or and what happens is that the baby tenses up inside the womb. And he said that before the brain is fully functioning, the vagal nerve is functioning, which means that it is, the freeze response is initiated very, 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 very early in our development. And what the thing that was really interesting is that he said when that's happening, the fetus is no longer able to process any other stimulus. And so their development is kind of like stunted or shifted. And so it's like, that's why it's so important to, like, if somebody is growing a new human in their body, we need to be surrounding them with as much love and care and just acceptance, and like just love, like just so much love is so needed, because otherwise we arrive on the planet, we are already like it. Yeah. I don't, was that too all over the place? But
I think breath is like breathing is work, and any kind, taking deep breaths is really important when you're going into a shame spiral because of that very reason. Like the vagus nerve needs to be activated, like breathing deeply and, activating that part of yourself that calms, is key, because we go into that. I mean, it could be a uterine. I mean, we could be going into a crouch that we've known for a very long time.
Since we're fetuses.
Physical response to shame is we slump our shoulders, we look down, we curl into ourselves. Like it's a protective crouch.
Literally the fetal position.
Yes, literally the feet, like we're in, and so sitting up straight, like making sure your eyes are engaged with the person or somewhere else, going outside. If you have to leave the situation, if you find yourself in a shame spiral and you're going into freeze, right? Or fawn, or one of the other survival mechanisms, leaving, getting away, taking deep breaths, coming back into yourself. And because we're winding up, I just wanted to give 2 things that I'm working, well, somatics for sure. So all the somatic practices are really healthy and healing for shame. And when we say somatics, we just mean body practices, like things that you would do with your body. So yoga and breath work, and just sensing into where you actually physically are, like engaging with your senses. Like, are my feet on the ground? What is the smell in the room? What color is, this person wearing? Anything that brings you back to the present moment. Because again, shame is an inward journey, and it locks you down from what's actually happening. So if you can re-engage your senses with any part of the room in the present moment, it'll interrupt that, and it'll bring your kind of brain back online. Like, oh, okay. And it'll bring your body back to the present with your brain. Like, okay, we're here right now. This shame spiral we're going into is probably from childhood. It's related to stories from the past. The present moment doesn't have to be it's triggering it, but it's not it. This isn't
right,
your mother.
Right. It's not about the cookie.
Not the art teacher that was yelling at you or whatever it is, like it's going on in your body. This is just something that's happening right now. And the body can always handle the present moment unless it's, a bomb dropped on it or something. Most of us are not in immediate danger. So we can just come back into the present moment. And then what you said was so perfectly about the puppet, get curious, like, be like, oh, look, I just checked out. I just dissociated, because that's that whole checking out thing that we do with shame, is like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm leaving the body. Bye. So coming back in and then noticing it is like more than 90%, I think, of, you know, coming back into your healthy nervous system response and disrupting that automatic shame spiral. And then I would add, there is a compassion and humor and almost sacred, I would add sacredness, which is why I actually added shame to Beltane, because I wanted to not talk about it as like a coach. I wanted to talk about it as something that's a sacred element of ourselves that has been so twisted in the dominant culture because it's so powerful, because it's inherently so powerful. That is how powerful our need to connect, our need to be loved and love, our need to have community. It's that important to us. That's a beautiful thing, that there's an emotion that exists just to protect that. However, because it's that, it's used to manipulate and oppress and shape you into the dominant culture, into behaviors that serve others. It's so easy to manipulate people with shame. So it's really key, if you're trying to change, if you're an activist in any way, trying to change a part of the dominant culture, you need to address shame. And what I think goes on is we don't address it, we use it. And we use it in the same way we've been taught, which is to shame, trying to use it against the dominant culture. You try to take the weapon they've used and then twist it around and shove it back on them. Like this whole idea of, you know, policing everybody and, you know, cancel culture and, you know, so-and-so didn't make the right comment about this, therefore they're a horrible person and we're not following them anymore. That whole concept of how we use shame as a weapon is not going to create the culture we want.
Correct.
It's just because that tool is a tool of oppression and manipulation as it's being used. And I understand that people have their own reason, but you know, that's a shame reaction. You're not unshaming. You're in a shame reaction. I'm feeling shame because I'm not doing enough as an activist. Because I'm, you know, living in America and bombs are dropping over there, so I feel horrible. Therefore, I'm going to shame you for not speaking out as loudly as I think you should. It's a shame reaction, and it doesn't work. If it worked, I'd be like, great, change the world with it. It does not work. It just keeps us all locked into this perpetual feeling of feeling terrible, and nothing ever changes. And the culture, the dominant culture, is great with that. It's like, oh, we know how to do this. Like, we can shame you back. And then you have two political parties and religions screaming at each other, shaming each other till eternity, right? So I really want to draw inspiration from, I think the two I actually want to, I really get inspired by thinking about is the queer community one. They've done such an amazing job of unshaming or transforming shame, which, you know, being in the closet, this whole idea that who you are, because that's what shame says. It's almost like you didn't do a bad thing. It's like, this is you, like you're wrong for feeling the way, for your sexual preference, for dressing this way, for, you know, having that style of haircut, whatever. It's you're the problem, right? And that is very much still going on in the dominant culture, but they've done such a great job of being like, we're just going to be more and more visible. We're going to talk about who we are more and more. We're going to push it into the light. We're going to claim it, claim language, you know, and that is how shame is dispelled. And so they created a community within the dominant community for each other, to find each other, to support each other, to celebrate each other. Pride parades, you know. The thing about pride, which is so interesting, is I don't believe pride is something you go get. Pride exists as a natural state when shame is removed. You're not shaming yourself, you're proud. Like, that is the default setting. We are not set to shame. Shame comes in as a cultural mechanism, right?
Which is just exactly what you're talking about, being like, having like the, you know, 35 bunches of carrots was you feel imbued with, you feel great because you feel proud of yourself. You feel like, right, like that yeah.
And it was easy to feel proud because there is a cultural message that would support, you know,
you were in alignment with and so that, yeah, but it
And
doesn't.
that's the same is true of being married. When I got married, I was actually fell into alignment with the culture. Now, whether I agree with the culture or not, it felt good. People say that about being a mom too. I'm not a mom, but people say that like when I
Yeah.
became a mother, all of a sudden there's the cultural badge of approval. Oh, you are now a role that has a function in the culture and good, you belong, you're a mom. Okay, yay, you did it.
Yes.
And it feels good. I mean, you can't help it. The dominant culture finally gave you a little seal of approval. And when those things end, like let's say, you get divorced, there is a whole baggage of shame that comes with that. Like, I mean,
Yes.
it coming from the culture. And this was actually the reason I got into this whole topic, because I could see that shame was a huge part of what happened in the marriage, that we couldn't, how we were interacting with each other was imbued in our own buckets of shame. They looked very different. We had different ways of dealing with them from our families. And so that was one of the main mechanisms of what fell apart. And also, it was one of my greatest teachers as I consciously chose not to go into that. I really, really questioned those shaming messages around all the process of how the marriage unpacked. And I feel really proud of my divorce. Actually, I feel extremely proud of it. And not because it wasn't hard. And so I want to just also say that as a really clearly, shame, like it's not about feeling good or feeling better. It's about not shaming it. So you clear the road for grief and anger.
Yes.
I was sad. I was angry. Okay.
Yes.
I was afraid. I was confused. I was all those things. I didn't feel great. I wasn't happy. But I was proud because I was able to let myself feel all those emotions without shaming myself. And because I didn't shame myself, I didn't feel the need to shame him. So I didn't attack him either, which actually there was another message that came up in my head of like, I should be making this harder for him than it is.
Right.
He did something wrong. It was wild. And I'm like, wait, why? Like, it's not my job to like enact shame on somebody. I mean, he definitely was doing it to himself. I did not need to add that, but I felt that message, like, and I had to really consciously catch it and be like, no, I don't, because I don't want to, and I don't want to do it to me either. It was a freedom in that, such freedom. And I'm proud of it because, again, because I didn't shame it, period. Like there's just no, it's not imbued with shame, and therefore the pride is there. It's fascinating. So getting curious and fascinated is one of the great unshaming techniques, like leaning in, being like, oh, tell me more. Like, how does that make you feel? Like, and then also, and I touched on this about Beltane, sacredness. Like this is a
Yes.
emotion that, again, I'm not going to label it. It's not a bad emotion. It's not negative. It's just that we experience it as negative in the culture. It in itself is actually quite sacred in that it's informing us of our deep need for connection in our bodies. So if you're in shame, you are in like there's some layers of disconnect with what's going on in your body. And so as we work with shame, we reconnect with the body, which is why all the body practices are really helpful. And it becomes sacred work. And I actually can't think of anything more revolutionary at this for changing the culture. If that's what we're having conversations about on this podcast, is to create nurture culture. I think the transforming of shame is like a core element of that. And doing it not by being, and that's why we don't have conversations on this podcast about, oh, this person in the dominant culture sucks, or we hate this and we hate that. We kind of consciously chose, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about what we love, what we want to grow, what we want to support. Do you know what I mean? And we can talk about how shame's showing up for us in relationship to the culture and be curious about it, but it's not about what so many of the conversations you hear are, shaming the dominant culture. Because I just feel like it goes right back into that same pattern.
I think that's a good summation of if we choose to observe and connect to our shame, and we find a sacred space with others to dispel it, to de-spell it, right? Like to release it, then we can open up the real connection, because it's impossible. Intimacy is really hindered by that. I would say it's, you know, like, oh my gosh, I'm just, this conversation is making me yeah, like all of the things, all of like the wrappings around us and the energies around us that prevent us from interacting and connecting.
And that's why Beltane's the perfect time to talk about this, because if Beltane is about the body and pleasure and intimacy and enjoyment, then shame is the wrappings that are the spell around all those things. And when you start to dispel that, that is your natural state. I believe that. I don't think these are things, I don't think happiness is like something you have to go find. It is simply about, you know, removing the film between you and seeing the light that you are, you know,
your infinite being self.
Yeah, we're radiant. We have all of this. And shame is, you know, again, it's a part of that. It's just not, it's not being used that way. And so it's deep work. It's deep transformation of a very powerful and sneaky emotion. It's hard to grab, it's hard to talk about, but I do think that if anybody listening to this, if you're interested, like this, I have a whole email series that I've created that I'm going to set up. This is my little Instagram widget I'm working on that unpacks this more. And I'm going to be leading a retreat on Saturday, May 4th, if you hear this in time. And I still have a couple spaces in that, and I'll be doing more work with it. But I think that, you know, it's a great topic for any activist group, anybody, any healing group, any, you know, consciousness.
And I think that I'm just keep start over, is that having a trusted container to do this work in is really essential, because often, and you can probably think about it like, you know, like who in your life feels safe and has discernment and has the ability to keep your secrets, you know, like that's why like therapy groups are really a sacred space. You know, so like, yeah, it's because it's like when you are in relationship with somebody else who's, I feel like last weekend is a perfect example of this, is like we just have these really deep conversations because there's a lot of trust in that group. And so like it just, it's a, you know, like choose well.
I think,
but that it's really helpful. I feel like it's an exponential opening of the heart to be able to, I'm loving this word dispel, to dispel shame is best accomplished in a connected vessel of relationship.
Because shame is relational in nature. That's why it's there. It's healed in relation. It is not an inside like conversation, because that is where it likes to hang out. It is best brought out on the table and say, you know, wow, I went home and I had a whole shame spiral about that comment I made yesterday at dinner. I thought all you guys hated me. I didn't think I'd be able to come back. You know, that is the piece when you bring that out and then have your friends be like, oh, like,
we love you so much.
We love you so much. Like it didn't even bother us. That, and then you're like, oh, okay. Like that is the magic. It's immediately dispelled. Shame cannot withstand the connection. Like when connection is reestablished, it's like gone. You know, it's actually quite simple. I mean, it's not that powerful. We expose it to sunlight, air, other people, and it's dispelled very, very quickly. But it does really benefit from that reassurance. I think that's why when they look at indicators of happiness and they say like good social relationships or good friendships are almost the #1 indicator of a happy life, I actually think it's because there's a container there to work out shame. Whether you realize what you're doing or not, you have people to be like, but I feel this way. And they're like, no, you're good. Like there is a trusted loop of people that you can keep doing this dispelling transformation. I call it shame shifting, like shape shifting, but like shifting that out of you and into something else, into more connection.
Oh,
Just a theory, but I think it's true.
hell yeah, Ginger. I raise my water bottle
Thank
to
you.
you.
Okay. Happy Beltane, everybody. This is just one little drop in the bucket as we move into this whole fun year of podcasting. I want to thank you, Iris, for being one of those people in my life that I can unpack this stuff with. And now we're doing it on air, which is even more fun. So thanks everybody for listening to us.
Thanks everybody for listening
We're
to us.
trusting that you're listening to these conversations. Those women are crazy, but you're like listening and being like, you are helping unshame our own personal, beliefs that we've been kind of unpacking on this podcast. And the more of us that do that for each other, the stronger this nurture culture becomes.
Shiny, shiny, shiny. Thank you, Ginger. I love you.
Thank you. Happy Beltane, everyone.
Happy Beltane.